everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, and you know what time of week it is. It's my favourite time of the week because it's Friday, gotta get down on Friday, and it's time to look at all of my wrestlers of the week. And you know what? This week's been a weird one for obvious reasons, but it's also been a weird one in terms of wrestling that was put on. Not a great deal of huge shows apart from WWE's Elimination Chamber, so we've had to look far and wide to find out the top 10 wrestlers of the week. And of course there are some people who were part of that Elimination Chamber show, but there's also some people from all over the place, and I guess we'll just jump straight in with a few honourable mentions. This week I cannot start by talking about anyone else apart from my boy Lince Dorado, who almost stole the show at Elimination Chamber with that ridiculous shooting star press from the very top of the chamber onto a pile of bodies below. Oh Lince, you marvellous beautiful man. If only Grand Metalik hadn't let him down by getting eliminated like immediately after that spot. Yeah, that was very frustrating, wasn't it? More honourable mentions from that show for Humberto Carrillo, who had a good match against Andrade but failed to win the US Championship, and Sami Zayn, who didn't have a very good match in my opinion, that handicap match against Braun Strowman, but he is finally the IC champion, and it's his first title. I was about to say singles title, it's just his first title on the main roster since moving from NXT. Long overdue is the phrase that springs to mind there. I also have to give one, I guess, to Shayna Baszler, even though I didn't enjoy her romp to victory in the Elimination Chamber. Bit of a lose-lose situation for WWE because it was the right decision, but it didn't make for an exciting match. But you know what? You're going to get an honourable mention if you win in a chamber match by decimating everyone in your path, so well done Shayna Baszler there. AJ Styles, not for his work at Elimination Chamber, because I didn't really like Undertaker's run-in, but he's trying single-handedly to get that feud back on track, as he showed with a great promo on Monday Night Raw. Outside of Raw and SmackDown, I also want to look towards NXT, where the Broserweights had another big win in the main event of this week's show, which came from the Performance Center, of course, and also Hangman Page again excelling in AEW, part of a very entertaining tag team match to close the show, and he continues to have these ongoing tensions with the rest of the elite. Now, with all that out of the way, it's time for my top 10, and number 10 this week, well, I didn't forget about him, Tom. It's bloody Keith Lee. Keith Lee successfully defended his North American Championship in the opening match of this week's NXT, taking on the much smaller but much more wily and evil Cameron Grimes. They did a really good job here of hyping up the size difference between the two and using that to great effect in the match. But it wasn't just the match which I enjoyed. It was very good, and I think it was the right call to have Keith Lee win, but it wasn't just that I enjoyed the aftermath too. In case you didn't see, what happened was Keith Lee won. He was celebrating in the ring and he was jumped from behind by Damian Priest with a nightstick like the big bloody boss man or something. He knocked Keith Lee down, he ran away, Dijakovic ran out to make the save, and Keith Lee dropped him with the Spirit Bomb. Why did Keith Lee do that when Dijakovic ran out to make the save? Well, today we were all discussing it in the office, and there are a few theories that spring to mind. The first one is that Keith Lee was annoyed because Dijakovic was holding or was near his title, and of course titles do strange things to some superstars in WWE, don't they? It's like Lord of the Rings, the One Ring and all that. Obsession, desire, passion. This has become like a fragrance advert. But yeah, there's one theory that Keith Lee did it because he saw Dijakovic with the belt, even though he ran in to save the day. There's another theory that he just didn't see Damian Priest behind him, and he assumed that it was Dominic who actually had jumped him. And the third theory, which is mine, I'm going to call it Jack's theory, the Jack theory in fact. The Jack theory is that Keith Lee did it because he's just a bit of an angry bastard. You know what? His character's a bit more of a deep two-dimensional one than we might initially give it credit for. Three-dimensional, I should say. Two's the flat one, isn't it? Because yes, Keith Lee's this great, charismatic, happy-go-lucky, fun-loving guy. He sings sometimes, he goes, oh my god. He loves gifs of himself. He loves when two of my colleagues do songs about him. But at the same time, he's got a nasty switch, hasn't he? We've seen him just tear apart security guards in the Full Sail parking lot before, and this time at the Performance Center, he took out a man who'd only come along to help him. And I think that, you know what, Keith Lee isn't quite the big happy babyface that we sometimes take him for. Ooh, intriguing stuff. 1 point to Keith Lee, and just buck your ideas up, mate. Stop being mean to those who are just trying to help you. Number 9 this week, it's only the reigning, defending United States champion Andrade Cien Almas. I'll say his full name. I don't care. I don't care about the man. Come at me, bros. Andrade Cien Almas. It's just Andrade, I'm not brave enough. Andrade was part of one of the better matches at Elimination Chamber. There were quite a few good matches on the show, and this was up there amongst them. I really enjoyed it, taking on Humberto Carrillo in that United States Championship match, but the reason that he doesn't get more points this week in the top 10 is just because it wasn't much that we haven't already seen before. We've seen Andrade beat Carrillo before. I thought Angel Garza was going to get involved in this match and maybe build tensions between Andrade and Angel Garza, Zelina Vega's two clients, who knows? That didn't happen. Instead, it was a heelish victory for Andrade. At one point, Zelina Vega took up the mat on the outside. Andrade went to DDT Carrillo onto the exposed concrete, a theme of that feud that's been ongoing, but instead, Carrillo backdropped him out of it. A little bit later on, though, Andrade picked up the win with a handful of dirty tights. No, not dirty tights, Jesus. A dirty handful of clean, I'm assuming, of clean tights. And yes, there were some remarkable feats of athleticism and agility and excellent chemistry between the two in this match, but again, this seemed almost like a very good Raw match, and there was nothing quite pushing it to that next level of an excellent pay-per-view match, if you get what I mean. One thing in its favour, though, is that it stood out well. Elimination Chamber, or at least the first half of the show, did a pretty good job of mixing up all the action. So we had an excellent technical encounter to start the show, followed by this Lucha Libre encounter that we're talking about right now, between Andrade and Carrillo. Then there was a chamber match. There was a really storyline sports entertainment-y match between AJ and Aleister Black. So yeah, I think the fact that Elimination Chamber was a bit of a mixed bag really did help this match. So congratulations to Andrade, 2 points for you, and he is still the United States champion. Now, come WrestleMania, whenever that may be, I can't work out who his challenger is going to be. Is it going to be Humberto again? Is it going to be Rey? Is it going to be Angel Garza? Is it going to be some kind of mixture of the three? Is there going to be a fatal four-way perhaps? Maybe with a lovely ladder stipulation thrown in. That's what I want to see, but there's various different avenues WWE could go with this. Number 8 this week. Now I quite like when this happens because this is a wrestler who I really wasn't that familiar with just before this week, essentially. But there was a GCW event on last night. It was available on Fight TV. I bought it and watched it this morning. I'm not going to stay up that late. I'm not crazy. I had stuff to do today. And it featured a man named Blake Christian. All heart Blake Christian. A good babyface boy. All heart Blake Christian. Now, from what I can gather, Blake Christian is an independent wrestler on the sort of southern scene, although he is working his way wider and wider because he's really, really good. He's a very top-class high flyer. This event took place in Philadelphia, so on the East Coast, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see his influence spread even more in the very near future. Now, this show was a really weird one because we had, various... Right, so it was GCW, so you know that, there's going to be weapons and blood and carnage and a very rowdy crowd and a very rowdy atmosphere. But this show, man, it was weird. This match that I'm about to talk about was good, but other parts of the show made me cringe a little bit. I get what they were trying to do, spread a bit of optimism and joy, and that's all fair enough, that's all well and good. But the way they did it was weird. You had just a succession of tough baby faces, like Nick Gage, for example, MDK, coming out and saying, "I ain't scared of no virus, this is GCW," and everyone going, "Yeah." And I was there thinking, oh, the virus doesn't care how tough you are, mate. So leaving aside the fact that, the pandemic isn't going to take into account how many thumbtacks members of the GCW roster can take, the main event was a good match between Blake Christian and Joey Janella, the bad boy. And it was good. It was a mixed bag of a match. There was some really good stuff, really nimble exchanges between the two. Blake Christian seems to be very, very quick on his feet, very agile, very nimble, a very good high flyer. At one point jumping from the stage to the ring and then back to do an attack on Janella, throwing a chair out of the ring at him. A very good all-round athlete and one who's small and compact enough to do all this flippy, exciting stuff. I can see why they put this match on last. It was a high work rate match, but it did get a little bit ridiculous towards the end in my opinion, and that may have cost Blake a little few places here. Basically, and it's criticism that I understand in wrestling, and it's one that's been banded about recently in the past couple of months or so, lot of near falls in this one, off destructive big moves, often involving tables and weapons and everything, moves that should realistically be putting people away. I get that it was the main event and it was two, big popular guys in the promotion going at it, especially Janella, who's now a huge star, but at the same time, it was a little bit of a weird one. And maybe it made other people on the show beforehand look a bit weak for not kicking out of far less destructive stuff. However, on the whole, it was an enjoyable match. It's the first full Blake Christian match I think I've ever watched. Really loved it. I think he's great. I'm going to be keeping an eye on him soon. He's all heart Blake Christian. The nickname's so babyface, man. Impossible not to cheer for this guy. I should mention, he bloody won as well. Big win over the bigger name in Joey Janela. onwards and upwards for you, Blake Christian. Fair play, 3 points. Number 7 this week. Now let's go over to Germany, where WXW put on their 16 karat gold tournament, their annual indie wrestling spectacular that many fans, including my colleague Matthew, go on an annual pilgrimage to and just describe it as the most wonderful thing. Unfortunately, I've never been before, but it's one for the future. Well, I say that, it's on my bucket list, but at the same time, there was a lot of blog posts and reviews and stuff written since this event that say that this might be the last year that the magic exists and the magic may have been sucked from it. I'll briefly explain what I mean. So there was a lot of WWE influence here. You know, David Starr, I'm sure you've read at the moment, he's not going to be appearing in WXW anymore because of rumours of WWE involvement. They've effectively tried to blackball him. Also, Alexander Wolf came along and won a title at the event, which again is a little bit, you know, it's a little bit WWE guy winning a belt in a beloved indie promotion. You see what I mean? At the same time, though, it seems like the match quality was there, and whether or not the magic still exists a year from now remains to be seen, but for now it seems like everybody there enjoyed a wonderful weekend of wrestling. So now on to number 7. I'm only going to be taking the day 1 results into account because that's the only day available as of now on demand on WXW Now, which I recommend you check out if you want to see more WXW. So the first guy I'm going to be talking about is someone that I'm familiar with, have met and seen wrestle in person, and he's very impressive, and his name is Speedball Mike Bailey. I feel like at WCPW we did a good job in booking Mike Bailey in that World Cup tournament and in putting him in matches where he could just show what he can do. And he had one of the best matches of the tournament, maybe the best of the entire tournament, against Will Ospreay, and he is just quite a spectacular wrestler. Bailey's style is basically this perfect little blend of martial arts, strike-based stuff, and insane athletic high flying, and he's quite something to behold live. Obviously this time I didn't see it live, but even on demand it comes across really well. His first round tournament match, which is the only one you can see right now because it was on day 1, day 1's the only one that's gone up, it was against Chris Ridgway. Now if you don't know Chris Ridgway, he's another guy, he's big on the UK scene, and he's another guy who loves to hit people in the face, loves to strike, so you knew that these two were a good matchup. And it did prove to be a good match, and basically they did strike each other a lot. Ridgway seems a lot stiffer and a lot more heavy and a lot more strong style, whereas Bailey seems a bit more just pure martial arts. He's a bit more like Bruce Lee or something. And basically, even though they both had strikes for days, it was Bailey who overcame using a combination of his strikes and his athleticism as well, because if you can't knock him down, he's going to flip around and drop a pair of knees on you from the top rope. And that's pretty much what happened to Chris Ridgway. A good showing from Ridgway as well. Let's give him a retroactive honourable mention. Now moving on to number 6, but staying with that tournament on day 1, because another guy who really impressed is none other than Shigehiro Irie. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that quite correctly, but yes, a quite beloved recent import to the UK and European scene over the past 2 or 3 years or so. And the reason he's so beloved is just, look at him. Look at that little face. But no, that is part of the reason that UK crowds particularly have connected with him so well, because he's adorbs, but at the same time, he is a big lad in the ring and he knows how to wrestle in a satisfying big lad style. I believe last year in Germany at this same event, Irie won the traditional Ambition tournament, which takes place in between 2 of the tournament days, and it's more of a shoot style tournament, almost like one of those blood sport events they do. And basically, I think he won that last year, but this year he was in the tournament proper and certainly impressed in the first round against Black Taurus. Again, I don't know what to really report here. It was just a really fun and good match, which if you've seen Irie wrestle before, you'll know exactly what that's like, especially when he's matched up against someone who is also a big guy, as Black Taurus is. Yeah, the pair, clonked into each other, which really reduces this match. It was far better than that. There was a good mixture of stuff here. But often, the most satisfying parts of the match were just when they were bashing into each other, picking each other up, throwing each other down. And the long and short of it is that Shigehiro Irie was able to win the match and progress to the next round. And I must say, I can't wait to monitor the progress of both him and Speedball Mike Bailey once those final 2 days of the tournament become available on demand. And that Ambition tournament as well, that shoot style one, that's scheduled to go up at some point too. I really want to see that as well. Right, now moving on to number 5. I've already mentioned him this week. It's the bad boy, Joey Janella. Yes, I mentioned Janella's match with Blake Christian, a very good match with some bad elements in it at that GCW event I watched that was on last night. Replays are available, by the way, on Fight TV. But he also had a big match on AEW Dynamite this week. Now, this week's Dynamite was a little bit of an underwhelming one in my opinion, but at the same time, it featured a big standout match, a trios match between Death Triangle, Pac, Pentagon and Phoenix, and the team of Joey Janella and Private Party. And I know what you're thinking, in this match filled with some of the best wrestlers in the world, like Pac, Pentagon, Phoenix, and the Private Party are two of the most exciting young high flyers in world wrestling as well. Was Janella going to be slightly lost in the shuffle, maybe? And my answer is, not in the slightest. In fact, Janella was possibly the standout of this match, actually. Even though he was on the losing side and did eat the pinfall at the end off the Black Arrow, he was all over the place for the first opening and middle stages of this. He was taking part in big triple team moves alongside the other members of Private Party. He was holding Pac on his shoulders in the Death Valley driver position for one of Private Party to launch themselves off Pac's back to the outside. Then he dropped the Death Valley driver on the apron. Yeah, Janella was awesome in this match, and this match, combined with that one at GCW, has really earned him some serious points this week. It's also Janella's first appearance this year on Wrestlers of the Week, which is a shame because I believe last year in 2019 he did come up with quite a few points. Hopefully this is the start of a nice little run for Janella, and I'm wondering what the plan is really for him in AEW beyond this feud with Kip Sabian and Penelope Ford. Number 4 this week, back to Elimination Chamber, back to WWE, and we're talking about the loser of the opening match. But what a match it was, and what a match it was in elevating the loser of it, and that man is Drew Gulag. I could not believe my eyes when I watched this opening match of Elimination Chamber. I couldn't believe that WWE had opened a pay-per-view in 2020 in this fashion, with a slow, technical, really excellently paced match classic that grew and grew as the match went on and eventually did, step up through the gears and everything. But yeah, this was quite something. It was two absolute technical wizards doing what they do best in front of a crowd that may not have appreciated it. It was a brave step, but they certainly did in the end. Now, of course, Gulag did lose the match, but at the same time, Bryan's reaction afterwards really helped put Gulag over. He was like, whoa, that was pretty good. He certainly pushed me close to my limit. And I think that the fact that this match was even put on is a bit of a triumph for Drew Gulag. He is a fantastic wrestler, a fantastic technical wrestler as well, which we are often easy to forget, I suppose, because he's such a comedy character with his PowerPoints and everything. I really enjoyed in 205 Live when that comedy PowerPoint side of things was scrapped and he was ultra serious, a bit more Kurt Angle-esque. Later Kurt Angle, not doofy Kurt Angle, but at the same time they have brought back this PowerPoint element, this slightly comedic element to Gulag on SmackDown, and I really wasn't a fan of that. So on the positive side, I'm glad that even though that element is back in his character, he was able to go out and have a match with one of the best in the world ever to do it and really impress in the process. Good week for Drew Gulag. Good week. Number 3, it's Daniel Bryan. Of course it is. 8 big points for Daniel Bryan this week. His first appearance in 2020, and it's still such a pleasure to have him on the Wrestlers of the Week league table, of course, since his return to wrestling. Yeah, he was excellent in this match, Bryan. Really helped put Gulag over as a threat, sold his offense and everything, not just physically with his body, but emotionally with his facial expressions as well, which was really effective. And as Gulag gradually outworked and outmaneuvered Bryan, Bryan became more and more desperate, and then Gulag started... Right, there was an element of this match I have to talk about. The dropping on the head. That released German suplex was utterly terrifying. It saw Bryan land right on the back of his head. Thankfully, he seemed okay. But Bryan, please try and cut these sort of bumps out of your matches, mate. I'm sorry, just, it was uncomfortable to watch. Mercifully, though, it didn't derail the match. Bryan was able to pick up the victory. And as I mentioned, he put Drew Gulag over, not just in the match itself, but afterwards too, with his expressions, with his mannerisms, with his body language towards Gulag. In fact, someone today, I think it might have been Ross or Tom, suggested that they could be a viable tag team heading into WrestleMania season. And I'd love to see that. I think they would be a phenomenal tag team, but at the same time, I think they both deserve to shine as single stars. Bryan always shines, but I think Gulag deserves to as well. Number 2 this week, this is going to be a crowd pleaser. It's none other than Big Otis. Otis Dozovich, now just Otis. Because man, what a huge week it was for him. So Otis obviously is having his heart broken, and we're all going through a collective heartbreak with him because of that bastard Dolph Ziggler and Mandy Rose as well, who is either being played like a fiddle by Dolph or is actually a heel at heart. We don't quite know what's going on yet. Now the problem is that you've made Otis angry there, haven't you, Dolph? And when Otis gets angry, well, he loses wrestling matches, it turns out, but he does so in very entertaining fashion. So first of all, there was that huge epic gauntlet match on SmackDown where Heavy Machinery stayed in it all the way through until the very, very end. They eliminated every other team apart from Ziggler and Rude right at the very end, and it was Otis who fell victim to Ziggler's super kick and lost the match for his team. But they came so close, and they really, really garnered an excellent crowd response in the process. And then also, how on earth could we forget that Elimination Chamber match, not just because of Lindsay's heroics off the top, I'm still thinking about it every night before I go to sleep, but also Otis's heroics in chasing Dolph Ziggler, crashing through the pod, lying on the outside being tended to, and passing the buck over to Tucky in the middle of the ring. Now, on to number one, and man, I'm gonna do it. It is. Let's get to it right now. Number one this week is Tucker from Heavy Machinery. 10 points for Tucker. What a glorious week it is when you can say that. What a nice man. I hope he doesn't turn out to be the heel in this feud. I really hope he doesn't. But yeah, huge week for Tucker. Excellent impression made upon those who maybe don't think he's that good in the ring, because God, he really is. Yeah, Tucker was awesome here. As much as I mentioned that Otis was great in that gauntlet match, it was Tucker carrying a lot of the load for a lot of it. And then in the chamber match as well, man, it was Tucker who really stole the show. Yes, everybody wanted to see Otis get his hands on Dolph, and that did happen very briefly, but Tucker was the one taking it to everybody, swanton bombing off the top of a pod, and he's a large man as well to do that kind of maneuver, and it was great. And then later on when Otis, had been eliminated, it was Tucker who was selling the emotion, who was saying, "Otis, are you okay?" And then you saw his face change from one of concern to one of rage, and he turned back into the ring and just took it to the heels, and unfortunately, tragically, was eliminated from the match then. Imagine if Tucker had gone on and won it by himself for him and his boy. That would have been fantastic. But unfortunately it wasn't to be. Now obviously there's a lot of fears that this storyline is going to end with a breakup in Heavy Machinery, either because Tucker has betrayed Otis and it was him all along behind everything, or because maybe just they'll fall apart because Otis will become so angry and obsessed by the situation and Tucker will have to be like, "What are you doing? Snap out of it," and it'll lead to an argument between the two. Now if that happens, I used to have worries that Tucker was going to get lost in the shuffle a little bit because Otis is the more overtly charismatic guy of the team, but Tucker has something, I think. I don't want to say that if they split up he'd definitely be okay, or that he'd definitely become like a huge single star, but this week has convinced me that there's definitely more chance of it happening than I previously thought. So that's it, 10 points for Tucker this week. What a performance. Let's give it up for Tucker. I love him. I think he's my new favourite wrestler. Now let's take a look at the league table. Now unfortunately there's not a lot of change to this week's league table. Moxley and Omega are still joint top of course, with Tanaka and Hangman Page bringing up the rear, but as we move down you'll see that it's largely exactly the same. That's because out of the top 10 this week, only Keith Lee had been on this list before in 2020. There was 9 newcomers to this league table on Wrestlers of the Week this week, so there's not a lot to report really, and usually at this point I'll say, oh, here's what's coming next week and everything, but honestly I don't really know. So yeah, this is a weird outro because I don't really know what to say, because usually I'll be like, oh, and then we've got this show coming up and this show coming up, but the current state of things, we don't know what's going to go ahead, we don't know what's going to get cancelled. All we know is that hopefully, probably, there's going to be some shows coming up from the WWE Performance Center. SmackDown's going to be from there this week, and also in Jacksonville, AEW are going to run a show next week as well. But beyond that, I really don't know what's going to happen. Hang tight everyone, let's all get through this together, and I'll see you very soon.